Welcome everyone to the first Herbalife Nutrition Institute Masterclass. Today's masterclass is on the topic of personalized nutrition. And I've got a pretty ambitious agenda today. I'm going to be covering diets, macronutrients, the microbiome, nutrient regulation, and body composition. So let's get started. And my goal today is for you to get a holistic understanding of human nutrition. Let's take a look. Well, first of all, I want to talk to you about what the challenges are of the modern diet. And these challenges are personalized, but many of us are guilty of one or more of these problems. First of all, excesses, excess sugar, excess salt, excess alcohol, tobacco, trans and saturated fats, chemicals in our foods, and simple carbohydrates. On the other hand, many of us have insufficient amounts in our diet of protein, plant protein, vitamins, minerals, good fats, fiber, and water. So one of our purposes today is going to be to take an inventory of all these substances in your diet and see how we can personalize it to get the best result for you. Well, obesity is the result of these imbalances. And as you can see on this slide, this is a global problem affecting many, many different countries with an increase between the years 2000 and projected out to 2030. It's a serious problem. That problem is typified here in the United States. As we look at obesity in America, just between 2000 and 2004, it goes from 30% to 42% in our country, with severe obesity doubling from 4.7 to 9.2%. So this all started back about 1970 to 2010, but clearly it's a global epidemic of obesity, and it's particularly bad here in America. Well, U.S. food habits explain some of this. If we look at the U.S. food habits between 1970 and 2010, what we see are lots of starchy foods: white bread, cereals, pasta, rice, potatoes, beans, and chestnuts. Chestnuts, not so much, mostly a Christmas thing, but starchy foods, clearly a problem. If we look at what Americans ate between 1970 and 2010, they ate 505 more calories per day on average in 2010 than in 1970. That's 2,544 versus 2,039 calories per day. So the increases were for grains such as white bread, 409 calories in 1970, 582 calories in 2010. Oil and dairy fats went up from 346 to 589 calories, and added sugars went from 333 to 367 calories. So we could see this pattern of foods that promoted obesity. And what did the United States government do in 1992? Well, they approved what's known as the U.S. Department of Agriculture Food Pyramid. Now, I don't blame the advisors who did this. This was a really good effort on their part, because actually the food manufacturers wanted to turn the pyramid upside down so it would be facing downwards with a less of the oils and things at the bottom. But in fact, what they ended up with was recommending more starches and grains at the bottom, 6 to 11 servings, without differentiating between whole grains and refined grains. As we'll talk about, that's an important distinction. The next level up was fruits and vegetables, and they divided those into 2 to 4 fruits and 3 to 5 of vegetables. If you combine those two, they really belong on the bottom of this advising pyramid. As we go up, they show meat and poultry and dairy products with their own groups. And then at the top, salts, sweets, oils, and fats, which then dribble down through the pyramid as there are hidden fats and hidden sugar in our food supply. Now, this was updated after a lot of controversy into what's called mypyramid.gov. And that one included steps to a healthier you. So we have this individual climbing these stairs and exercising. Well, that's a nice addition. However, the width of these various bars here on this pyramid are exactly identical to what was in the original 1992 pyramid. And here we are with this being done in 2010. Then they gave up pyramids altogether and went to a plate. And here's the myplate.gov. Protein is a little low on the plate, and that's because there is a glass of dairy product over here, and dairy is a major industry. And what we're going to learn from all of these pyramids and various dietary guidelines around the world is that they're influenced by the food industry. So there are a lot of limitations to food guides. One of the major limitations is one size does not fit all people. You have particular needs for your protein, for your carbohydrate, for your fats. And we're going to talk about how that fits to your body. And beyond that personalization, there's balance in the rest of the diet. It becomes quite complex as we start to learn more about genomics, epigenomics, the effects of the microbiome, and more personalization linked to other factors. So the food industry back in the 1970s discovered something called the bliss point of foods. What they found in some very careful studies was that 10% sugar by weight and 20% fat by weight was what they called the bliss point. It's what's based for the development of ice creams and pastries and cookies and donuts. And the people who studied taste were actually called psychophysicists. And they identified the bliss point as that sensory profile where you like food the most. So these are foods that are really hard to eat just one, as they used to say about potato chips. These foods call out to you from the refrigerator, and they're a major element of poor diet because you want to eat more of them. So personalized nutrition actually embraces how each of you is unique and that we're all biochemically individual. Personalized nutrition within the limitations of current methods looks at the web-like interaction of physiological factors, including hormones, genes, diet and lifestyle, environmental toxins, and digestion for a holistic view of personalized nutrition. Now let's start with the dietary macronutrients. That's a simple place to start. These are the largest classes of nutrients: protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Most foods, though, are combinations of more than one macronutrient. The energy yield of these macronutrients is well known. Carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram, proteins 4 calories per gram, and fat packs a wallop of 9 calories per gram. That's why the idea of using more low-fat foods was so popular in the 1980s. But the body uses and stores these macronutrients in very different proportions than they are found in the diet. As shown on this slide, your dietary calories may be 15 to 30% protein, 25 to 35% fat, and 55 to 60% carbohydrate, as shown on the myplate.gov. However, your body stores this very, very differently. It turns out that carbohydrate has to be stored together with water. It weighs a lot, so our bodies only store 1,200 calories, or about 300 grams of carbohydrate, as glycogen in our muscle and liver. Protein, we store about 54,000 calories, but most of this is functional. So if you lose more than half of it, your immune function goes away and you're susceptible to life-threatening infections. So we really like to say about half of that 54,000 can be available to convert protein to carbohydrate. Fat is your major store of energy. Even a non-obese person has 130,000 to 160,000 calories of stored fat. And do you know that fat weighs the same amount, about 13.5 kilograms, in the mythical 70-kilogram man as the 54,000 calories of protein? So it's a very efficient place to store calories. Now, a lot of people like to count calories. That's a very old method of weight management. And it turns out that carbohydrates, protein, and fat are handled very differently in your body. When you exercise, you burn calories, and you also burn calories at rest. So there are really 3 components of energy expenditure: resting metabolic rate, exercise or physical activity, and the thermic effect of food, which is what happens when you digest food and have to incorporate it into your body. Now, one point I want to make is that there's great interconvertibility of macronutrients. Your body is able to interconvert various macronutrients into the other forms, from protein to carbohydrate to fat. Some of these are more difficult than others metabolically, but they're all possible. The most common one is to take fat, which is called a triglyceride. It has a 3-carbon backbone called glycerol. That can then be converted into glucose. The fatty acids can be put into what's called the tricarboxylic acid cycle to make energy in the form of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. The amino acids are related to the carbohydrates because some of the amino acids, glycine, serine, and alanine, can be converted into carbohydrate glucose. These are called glucogenic amino acids. Other amino acids fit into the fat pathway. So this is how macronutrients can be interconverted. The body needed this because you never knew throughout the history of mankind on this earth when you would be dependent on a high-fat, high-carbohydrate, or high-protein diet. So the interrelationship of carbohydrate, lipid, and protein metabolism is that any energy nutrient can fuel the body short term. Some amino acids can be synthesized into fat or carbohydrate. Most amino acids are precursors for carbohydrate and fat synthesis. The tricarboxylic acid cycle, which actually exists within the energy factories in your cells called the mitochondria, can go in either a direction of making energy, or it can be reversed and take up some of these substrates from protein, fat, and carbohydrate and build others. So it's what's known as either an anabolic, that is a building, or catabolic breaking down pathway. And several tricarboxylic acid cycle intermediates form carbon skeletons of amino acids and serve as precursors of glucose. Protein, unlike carbohydrate and fat, is a dynamic nutrient. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that instead of just being taken up and stored if there's too much, protein is constantly being broken down and built back up again. The protein in your food is digested in the intestine into what are called amino acids. There are 21 common amino acids, and of these, 9 are what are known as essential, which means your body can't make them. You have to get them in your diet, just like vitamins and minerals. Once you have all those amino acids, you reshuffle them into all the thousands of proteins that you need in your body for various purposes and make that protein. So therefore, as we look at the diet, it's important to analyze, do you have the right amounts of essential and non-essential amino acids in the proteins you eat? And the way we assess that is something called the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. And what that looks at is the levels of these amino acids in various proteins. Shown in the 4 blue bars are complete proteins that have all the essential and non-essential amino acids. Proteins like soy, dairy, and egg protein. And then you can combine some of the plant proteins shown in the orange bars, which are missing some of the amino acids, into complete proteins by properly combining them. So the essential and non-essential amino acids are well known. The essentials, again, can be taken in from the diet, but it cannot be made in the body, whereas the non-essential amino acids, they can be shuffled around. So you can make one amino acid into another through biochemical reactions. Now, protein builds up and breaks down muscle protein all day long. So after a meal, amino acids from the protein you ate go up in the bloodstream. These are transported into the muscle cell where they promote new muscle protein synthesis. Between meals, when you're not eating, the amino acid levels in the blood go down, the amino acids come out of the muscle, and there's muscle protein breakdown. So you need to have a proper balance of protein with every meal and after exercise, as we'll talk about. And breakfast protein is particularly important because you've not been building protein all night while you were asleep. Now, to maintain muscle, you also need exercise. People who are sedentary can lose as much as 3 to 5% of their muscle mass every 10 years after the age of 30. Even if you're active, you're still going to have some muscle loss with aging. But the right amount of protein and regular exercise, resistance exercise, aerobic exercise, along with increased protein, can reverse some of these changes of aging. So remember to have 20 or more grams of protein within 30 minutes to 1 hour after a 30 to 45-minute exercise session. Now, protein intake at mealtime is also important. Many people eat too little protein at breakfast, a little more at lunch, and way too much at dinner. Now, it's not that those calories are lost to the body, it's just that they're not being optimally directed at muscle protein and organ protein synthesis. So a better way to do it is with the blue bars. Divide your protein into equal amounts at breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks to reach your daily protein target, which is particular to the amount of protein in your body, as we'll see. So obesity is defined as excess body fat, not simply excess weight. But since weight and height is easier to measure, these are used commonly to define obesity. We use something called the body mass index, which is weight over height squared. Mathematicians back in the 1800s found that weight over height linked up to body fat if it was height squared. And therefore, you can look at this chart and see that different amounts of obesity are indicated in the blue, green, yellow, orange, and red areas. And as you get heavier, the body mass index goes up. So a normal body mass index is under 25. Below 18.5 is underweight. Overweight is 25 to 29.9. Obese is 30 to 35, and extremely obese is over 35. Now, these averages are for a typical population, but they've been adjusted in areas like Southeast Asia and China, where people tend to have more concentration of upper body fat and not quite so much body fat all over their body. So how do you calculate your body mass index? Well, you just take your mass in pounds divided by height squared in inches and multiply by 703. Or you can take your mass in kilograms divided by height in meters squared and multiply by 703. Now, you can also calculate or estimate the amount of body fat in kilograms by using the equations on this slide. And these were developed by Garrow and Webster. These are well-known equations based, again, on this body mass index estimation. But the errors in estimation are approximately 4.2 kilograms for men and 5.8 kilograms of fat for women. And why where these errors come from? They come from the fact that people have different amounts of lean body mass, which is really an important part of personalization. Lean body mass, or what's known as fat-free mass, determines how many calories you burn at rest, such as when you're listening to this talk. The more lean body mass you have, the higher your metabolism is at rest. Let me give you an example. Say a man has 150 pounds of lean, he burns 2,100 calories per day. His wife, who has about 100 pounds of lean, burns only 1,400 calories per day. They both go on the same diet. Now the husband starts losing weight, and the wife can't lose a pound on a 1,500 calorie diet. Well, the husband turns to his wife and says, you know, honey, your problem is you have no willpower. Her real problem is she has a lower metabolism, so therefore it's harder for her to lose weight on that same diet where the husband is losing weight because he has a higher metabolism due to higher lean body mass. How do we measure that practically? Well, you can use bioimpedance analysis. This is a method where you put a very tiny electrical current through the body, and a machine has a computer in it that looks at the percent lean, because lean is mostly water and it conducts electricity. Fat is an insulator and it does not. Now, there are other things that are neither lean or fat, and that's the bone mineral. And so the body has to be estimated using some various mathematical equations. So again, this is an estimate, but it's a very practical estimate, and it's much more accurate than the body mass index, which we indicated has that 4 to 6 kilogram error involved. Another great way to use the principles we used in bioelectrical impedance, but also get a picture of where the fat is located, is called magnetic resonance imaging. And this is a method where radio waves produced by a coil are aimed toward the body, and the radio waves create magnetism within the tissues of the body so that the water behaves very differently than the fat. And this actually creates a picture shown on the right side of this graph. And basically what you have here is an MRI of fat in a 6-foot man who has normal body mass index, but excess yellow internal fat around the intestines and in the liver. And Dr. Jimmy Bell in England showed that 40% of people in London had excess body fat inside their body, even at a normal body mass index. And he called this thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And he even studied people who had the same waist size, but different amounts of abdominal fat. Here are 6 individuals, all with a 33-inch waist, but some have much more fat than others. The one with more white coloring on there, that's more fat. And then in addition to that, he found that 40% have mild infiltration of liver fat. So that once the fat in your blood gets to a certain excessive level, it's stored in your liver. This is a normal function of liver. However, in many cases, this fatty liver can lead to further liver issues in the future. Now, other methods of body composition research methods include total body potassium, this X-ray scan of the body called dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, underwater weighing, which a lot of physical education departments used to do. It's not a very accurate method because as you float in the water, there's air in your lungs. And then this has been changed to something called the bod pod, where you sit inside a chamber and displace air and sit on a seat that is also a scale. It has some of the same problems as underwater weighing. And then finally, you can introduce deuterium or heavy water into the bloodstream and look at the water volume that deuterium is distributed into, and then calculate from there your lean body mass. Another exciting new method is called infrared 3-dimensional shape analysis. And you might have encountered this if you've gone to an airport and gone through security clearance, where they aim an infrared beam at your body. As shown on this slide, you end up with 14 very accurate circumferences and a kind of an avatar of your body. And you can follow this over time as you work out and change your body shape every 3 months. So I classify obesity into 3 groups, all of whom have excess body fat. So body fat of over 20% in men, over 30% in women is considered obesity. Sarcopenic obesity is being obese with reduced lean mass. Proportionate obesity is where you have a typical average amount of fat and lean. And then hypermuscular obesity, this is for a lot of the athletes who work out. They have increased lean mass, high body mass index, but normal body fat. So sarcopenic obesity is the really important problem we need to focus on, because that's what results from inactivity or not getting in enough protein in your diet. We did a study back in 1996 in our high-risk breast cancer clinic, and I had 28 young women, normal body mass index. They weighed about 138 pounds at a height of about 5 foot 5 inches tall, with a body mass index of 23, which is right in the normal range, but their body fat was 35%, 34.6 to be exact. And that's because they had lost muscle due to inactivity and reduced protein intake. You know, in the old days, people go out to dinner and say, oh, I just want a salad. I don't need to really eat. Well, that person doesn't have enough protein in their diet. Other causes of sarcopenic obesity include chronic use of steroids, corticosteroids, prolonged inactivity or bed rest, reduced protein intake, low male hormones or hypopituitarism, neuromuscular diseases, menopause and age-related problems with hormone release. It's very common in men to have andropause or reduced levels of testosterone as they age. And then just genetically, some people have a low lean body mass. Now, the functions of protein that we use to maintain our lean body mass, it does that, but it also controls hunger. And it is very important to have protein for many, many different functions in your body. And it's also a major antacid in your stomach and in your bloodstream. So it helps with acid-base balance. Now, protein balance is complex in that it's going up and down throughout the day, as shown in this slide here. So the muscle's releasing amino acids, then taking them up again, but you end up in balance. You start out with 100 grams of protein in your diet, you digest it into amino acids, you have all this cycling of body protein, and then that same 100 grams comes out in your urine. That would be a balanced day. Now, when we look at that, we have to look at the individual amino acids, as we mentioned before. So the 4 blue bars have complete proteins shown on this protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. This includes milk protein concentrate, whey protein isolate, whey protein concentrate, and then combinations of rice, quinoa, and flax. Another complete protein is soy protein, which has all the essential and non-essential amino acids and is the most complete protein in the plant world. As we go down to pea protein, oats, and so forth, some amino acids are missing. However, the good news is that those plant proteins can be combined, so-called complementary proteins. So if we combine red beans and rice, we make up for the limiting methionine in the beans. We combine lentil curry and naan, we make up for the fact that grains might be missing lysine and threonine. Soy and sesame also help deal with the lysine limiting amino acid in nuts and seeds, and so forth. So you can create, with careful combination, complete proteins throughout your diet and also in protein powders, but always be sure to check the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score for protein powders made from plant proteins. One index of protein balance is nitrogen balance. And you know there's nitrogen in all of the amino acids, but as you can imagine, all the amino acids have different molecular weights, different structures. Different proteins have different structures. But for this, we assume that every protein has an average amount of nitrogen. And we look at the nitrogen balance by looking at how much protein nitrogen you get in your body and how much you put out in the form of what's known as urea. Now, the earliest studies on this were done in 1973 on medical students in a cafeteria. They were fed egg protein. And what they found out was the nitrogen balance evened out at 0.6 grams per kilogram body weight per day, and at 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight per day, they were in positive nitrogen balance. Now, that created what was known as the recommended dietary allowance of the minimum amount of protein that people should have around the world. However, a new concept called dietary reference intake was then developed by the Institute of Medicine, and this individualizes protein recommendations more. So endurance athletes need 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight per day for their dietary reference intake, because as you can see, they don't go into positive nitrogen balance until you get to that level of protein intake. A weightlifter with much larger lean body mass needs 2.5 grams per kilogram body weight per day for his or her dietary reference intake. So the dietary reference intake becomes an acceptable range between the RDA and the upper limit, which is where you're getting perhaps too much protein. And that range is between 10% of calories and 35% of calories. Now, seen a different way, the acceptable intake is between 0.8 kilograms per kilogram body weight per day and 2.5 grams per kilogram body weight per day, which is between 10% of calories and 35% of calories from protein. Now, we've chosen about 30%, which is shown by this gold star, well within the acceptable range. So we are not recommending a high protein diet. We're recommending a dietary protein intake that's the right amount to control hunger and build muscle. And what is that recommendation? Well, the RDA calls for 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. For practical purposes, that comes down to about 0.5 grams per pound of lean body mass, which is about 15% of calories. For strength training activities, for maintaining your lean mass as you age, we recommend 1 gram per pound of lean body mass, and that is about 30% of calories from protein. So who needs more dietary protein? Can we give the same amount of protein to these two people and expect it to support their lean mass? Obviously not. It depends on the amount of lean body mass. As you can see, this marathon runner has much less lean body mass than this fitness model. So how much protein do you need? It is personalized based on your lean body mass. Now let's go on to carbohydrate. The main function of carbohydrate is to supply energy. So let's take the example of an athlete who's gotten all the protein he needs to support lean body mass, but he's got to do a lot more work. He's a swimmer. He's going to swim miles every day. The extra calories now come from carbohydrate once you've supported your lean mass. It spares protein from use as an energy source. And to be honest with you, protein's rarely used as an energy source. You'd have to run 100 miles a day to start really burning protein. The body spares protein, burns energy from fat and carbohydrate during exercise. And the other function of carbohydrate, especially the simple carbohydrate sugar, is to provide flavor and sweetness to foods. So we classify carbohydrates as monosaccharides, that's single atoms of carbohydrate, or molecules of carbohydrate, disaccharides, which are combinations, and polysaccharides. So monosaccharides are glucose, fructose, and galactose. Disaccharides are sucrose, which is table sugar, a combination of glucose and fructose. Lactose, or milk sugar, a combination of glucose and galactose, and maltose, found in starches. Polysaccharides include starches that have longer combinations of glucose, glycogen, and maltodextrin. Complex carbohydrates include most dietary fibers, and these are divided into two groups. The soluble fibers that are not digested by us as humans, but by the bacteria in our gut, the microbiome. Insoluble fibers are neither digested by us or by our bacteria. They're indigestible, so they help with bowel movements, but they are not digested for calories. Now, highest percentage of carbohydrates, calories are in sugars, jams, honey, plain potatoes, fruits, and juices. The next highest are in rice, bread, pasta, and refined cereals. Then whole grains, beans, and vegetables. There's essentially no carbohydrate in meat, eggs, poultry, oils, butter, or margarine. And in the US, can you believe it? The top 5 sources of carbohydrate are white bread, soft drinks, pastries, added sugars, and potatoes. Now, sweeteners in the diet include both nutritive sweeteners and non-nutritive sweeteners, or what are known as artificial sweeteners. Sugars and sugar alcohols are the typical nutritive sweeteners. The primary source of sugar is high fructose corn syrup in a lot of foods. This is what's found in colas and other soft drinks. There's no advantage to honey, brown sugar, maple syrup. In fact, there are 61 names for sugar on labels of foods because they want to hide the fact that there's sugar in those foods. Now, sugar alcohols you may be familiar with, and sugar-free gums. They have an advantage for tooth decay because the sugar is not available to the bacteria in the mouth to convert them into acid, but they do get digested ultimately by your gut bacteria, and they have calories. These include sorbitol, mannitol, xylitol, and erythritol. Non-nutritive sweeteners are the artificial sweeteners. And what you notice about these is they're all much sweeter than sugar. Saccharin is 300 times sweeter, aspartame 200 times sweeter, sucralose 600 times sweeter. And so what you find with all of these artificial sweeteners is that when you have a packet of them, they put a little bit of sand in there so it'll sound like sugar when you move the packet, but they are very, very sweet. And they're often sweeter than the same amount of sugar that you would put into coffee. So in a way, they can trigger overuse of sweeteners in the diet. They are okay when they're used to balance the sweetness in a food, but if you're adding them yourself and making things extra sweet, you're going to have a problem. Now, some researchers have found that these have an effect on the microbiome because the microbiome uses sugar as a fuel to grow. So when you put artificial sweeteners in, there's less sugar present. This is also true for stevia, which is a so-called natural sweetener that comes from leaves. It has a particular compound in it that does look sweeter to the body, but it's 250 to 300 times sweeter than sugar. And all of these have a similar use in the diet. So as I said, sugar is sugar. 61 different names for sugar on food labels: agave, apple juice concentrate, high fructose corn syrup, molasses, maple syrup, table sugar, and honey. All of these have different amounts of sweetness, but they're all forms of sugar. Let's take a closer look at non-nutritive sweeteners. You know, saccharin is the oldest artificial sweetener. And there's always been the rumor that it caused bladder cancer. And this was reported in some rat experiments, which were subsequently debunked, and population studies don't support it. So saccharin does not cause bladder cancer. Aspartame is made from two amino acids, aspartic acid and phenylalanine. It was actually discovered in the laboratory by a biochemist who touched these two amino acids to his tongue and found they were sweet. Not good lab practice, but he made a discovery of aspartame. It has to be avoided by people with a genetic disease called phenylketonuria. And these people cannot have phenylalanine. And you'll notice that particular warning on diet sodas and things like that. Asulfame K is primarily used with other sweeteners in soda. And sucralose is a really interesting one because remember I told you sucrose or table sugar is made from one atom of glucose, one molecule of fructose. They are bound together, but if you put big chlorine atoms in the middle, no enzyme can get to it, not a human enzyme and not a bacterial enzyme. So this is essentially goes through the body unchanged, no calories are obtained, but you have the sweetness. And you can cook with this as well. Now, sucralose has been said on the internet to be absorbed. All that's not true. It simply goes through your body unchanged. Now, there are some Israeli experiments showing that the microbiome has changed, but that's not surprising because the bacteria in the gut need sugar to grow. So obviously the population is going to be changed when you take away some sugar. This is also true for stevia, a plant extract. These commercial products that use stevia often have other sweeteners mixed in. If you use just stevia, you might get an aftertaste. Now, sugar alcohols are really interesting. Mannitol, sorbitol, xylitol. They have calories because ultimately the bacteria in your gut are going to digest these sugar alcohols. But they're useful for sugar-free gums or other foods to reduce the sugar in your mouth as a strategy to reduce dental disease, which is a major problem around the world. It's not an advantage in terms of avoiding sugar because large amounts ultimately cause diarrhea, and it's not readily metabolized by bacteria in the mouth, so it does help with tooth decay. Erythritol is a special sugar alcohol that's also calorie-free, but it's absorbed, so it doesn't cause the GI side effects. And it has an interesting side effect of kind of mouth-watering, and it's an interesting sugar alcohol. So what do we recommend for carbohydrate? Carbohydrates typically supply about 50% of calories. Most of the calories in fruits and vegetables are carbohydrate calories, but I call these good carbs because they come along with vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, fiber, and water. Use fruits and vegetables to meet your carbohydrate needs, 50 to 70 calories per 100 grams, and I like to recommend 7 servings a day of fruits and vegetables. Then add limited amounts of whole grains, so about 250 calories per cup, to help meet your calorie needs. And of course, burn off those calories through exercise because the extra calories from carbohydrates will be stored as fat in your body. Limit your intake of refined carbohydrates and simple sugars. Now, salivary amylase begins to break down starches that you eat from your diet. Amylase is inactivated in the acid environment of the stomach. And the intestines then have a pancreatic amylase that steps in to convert starches to maltose. Intestinal enzymes convert disaccharides to monosaccharides. Liver converts fructose and galactose to glucose. And then glucose can be exported to the different tissues in the body and either burned for energy or stored as glycogen or converted to fat. Undigested fiber is broken down by intestinal bacteria. So whatever you don't eat of your carbohydrates will be eaten by your gut bacteria. Now, dietary fibers that will be eaten by gut bacteria are the soluble fibers, pectins and gums. These are found in fruits, barley, oats, beans, and thickeners. They slow stomach emptying. They give you a feeling of fullness, so they're good for weight management. They slow glucose absorption, so they're good in terms of people who have glucose intolerance, and they can lower blood cholesterol by binding it and taking it out of the body. The insoluble fibers, an example would be celluloses or wood fiber. These are totally indigestible. The wheat bran, brown rice, and vegetables are all examples of substances in your diet that contain some of these insoluble fibers. It increases the weight of your feces, it increases the movement of the intestines, but it doesn't really add any calories to your diet. So the benefits of dietary fiber are they absorb water and hold onto it in the intestine, leading to more regularity by increasing stool bulk and weight. Fiber binds estrogen, reduces circulating estrogen levels. Fiber binds bile salts, which contain cholesterol, takes it out of the body. Fiber slows glucose absorption, and fiber provides satiety and helps with weight control. So we recommend for everyone 25 grams to 40 grams of fiber per day. You can get a lot of these from fruits and vegetables and whole grains. Now, resistant starch are starches resistant to breakdown by digestion. They contribute bulk, but also, like soluble fiber, are digested by the bacteria. Fermentation of resistant starch produces beneficial fatty acids like acetate, propionate, and butyrate. The result is less growth of pathogenic bacteria in your gut, so it has a very good benefit for your body. This is found in unripe bananas, navy beans, lentils, barley, and whole grain breads. So when you go to the store and get bananas, try to get number 4 or 5, because as the banana gets ripe, it makes more sugar, and this resistant starch is converted to sugar by many of the metabolic processes in the banana as it ripens. Okay, I introduced the microbiome in terms of digestion of carbohydrate, but the microbiome means much more than that. It has changed our understanding of nutrition science and of personalized nutrition. So the message is you are not alone. You are carrying 14 trillion bacteria in and on your body. The majority of these bacteria are in your GI tract, in your colon, where they metabolize these fibers, these soluble fibers we've been talking about. So the gut bacteria eat what you do not digest and make substances that are absorbed into the blood and circulate to all the cells and organs of your body. So you can actually think of the microbiome as a forgotten organ which interacts with the rest of your body. It contains over 1,000 species of bacteria that are individual to your body and stable over time as a result of an interaction between your genes and the bacterial genes. And this is very analogous to what happens to plants. Plants live in soil. As they put their roots down into the soil has got a lot of bacteria. It has its own microbiome, if you will. And so the plant roots interact and attract beneficial bacteria, repel harmful bacteria. Your body does the very same thing. So in any given person, your microbiome is pretty stable. And shown on the slide, the various colors correspond to large families of bacteria. As you can see, throughout the year, the bands stay pretty constant, except for a short period where the green band of proteobacteria came up, and that was during an intercurrent illness. So as long as you're healthy, your microbiome is pretty stable, and this has a lot of impact on your personalized nutrition. The original human diet was based on fruits, vegetables, and all plant parts rich in fiber, phytonutrients, vitamins, and minerals. In the last 50 years, we've seen a change in our diet as snack foods, rich in fat, sugar, and salt, have swamped our bodies with just enough vitamins and minerals to avoid deficiency disease, but not enough of the things we need from this rich plant pharmacy that we call phytonutrients. There are over 10,000 phytonutrients identified. So you affect your microbiome by what you eat or do not eat, and the microbiome affects your body and your immune function by the products it produces. The gut microbiome amazingly also has a daily rhythm, just as we have. Feeding and fasting rhythms are influenced by signals from the gastrointestinal tract, which connects to your brain and to your biological clock. The gut microbiome, bile acids, hormones, nutrients, and substances made by the gut bacteria circulate in the blood. And so the microbiome circadian rhythms are influenced by diet, the time of eating, and your central circadian rhythm, which is then affected by night and day and where you are on the globe. So if you fly from one time zone to another, you may throw this off, explaining why a lot of people with long distance flights have gastrointestinal disturbances and they disturb their microbiome. Regular meal times help to regulate the microbiome. So part of your balanced nutrition and healthy active lifestyle should be to eat those meals at approximately the same times whenever possible. Now, a study done by Israeli researchers in 2015 showed the importance of the microbiome and how much blood sugar rises after eating particular carbohydrates. What they found was that two people eating the very same carbohydrate could have a very different response. And they tested 800 people with many, many different carbohydrates and different meals and different foods. And what they found was that in the same person, it was highly predictable because the microbiome was stable, the rise in blood sugar was stable. However, in different people, they could be very different. So in one study, they looked at the response to sourdough bread versus white bread in different individuals. And what they found was within the same individual, the blood glucose response was very similar. However, in different individuals, it was very different. And the differences could be accounted for by differences in the gut microbiome. So having your stable microbiome, eating a diet rich in plant foods, having the right amount of fiber can help you with controlling your blood sugar. And this is very important because many people have problems with blood sugar control. As you know, type 2 diabetes is associated with obesity. It's another global epidemic, and it has to do with the effects of having too much blood sugar in your blood, putting a strain on your pancreas and insulin secretion over many years. So which carbohydrates and fats should you eat? Well, let's talk about a good carb, good fat diet. Both low carbohydrate diets, where we try to minimize the carbohydrates to a really low level, or high fat keto diets, where you get the fat to a really high level, cause confusion and they're hard to follow. So how much and which carbohydrates and fats should you eat? Well, choose carbohydrates that have what's known as a low glycemic index, or GI, at meals. That means that the rise in blood sugar, as shown on the slide, is going to be lower than a so-called high glycemic index diet, which would be the high refined carbohydrates or high sugar foods. The rapidly absorbed sugars are good for you during exercise in limited amounts, such as in a sports drink, but you want to have most of your diet provide carbohydrates with low glycemic index, including products like protein powders, which have a low glycemic index. So choose your fats carefully as well. Use olive oil and avocado oil for cooking. Try to avoid vegetable oils high in omega-6 fats, and then have ocean caught fish or take fish oil supplements while eating a low-fat diet to maximize the effects of the added fish oils in your supplements. Well, we've talked about glycemic index, which indicates how much blood sugar rises after eating a particular food, but it's also important to understand glycemic load, at least for researchers in this field. Now, the glycemic load is determined by multiplying the glycemic index by the number of grams in the particular food you're eating divided by 100. And this glycemic load actually clarifies certain problems relative to weight management. For example, let's look at carrots and carrot juice. A carrot has relatively low calories, but the sugar in the carrot has actually got a high glycemic index, but you get very little of it in a single carrot. If you take 2.5 carrots and make a glass of orange juice, now you've got a high glycemic index and a high glycemic load. Whereas with a carrot, you've got a high glycemic index, but a low glycemic load. This applies to lots of foods in the diet, but as you can imagine, the numbers become very complex, so it's easier to just choose low glycemic index fruits and vegetables. Now, color is another important way to encourage more fruit and vegetable intake. Most Americans eat only 3 servings, and I like to joke it's iceberg lettuce, French fries, and ketchup. The recommendations really range from 5 servings a day to 7 to 9 servings per day of 100 grams each. And this is easy to accomplish with a meal plan. And the benefit is all those color groups have different families of phytonutrients that have different functions in the body, and that diversity helps your microbiome, and it helps all the cells and organs in your body. Now, fiber supplements are important because most people don't get enough fiber in their diet. Most people just eating a typical diet might get 10 or so grams of fiber per day. You need 25 to 40 grams of fiber per day from foods and supplements. Soluble fiber, as we've said, is digested by gut bacteria and contributes to a healthy microbiome. Insoluble fiber passes through the gut and moves the intestine, contributing to regularity. Soluble fiber also swells in your stomach and promotes fullness, so it helps with weight management. Adding fiber or fiber-rich fruits to your protein-rich shake can make it thicker and more filling, so have fiber as part of your diet. Now, to prove this, there was a study called the Diogenes study. Diogenes was a man who held a lantern looking for an honest man. That's what they named the study. But in fact, it's a diet study, which also included some genetic studies. I guess that's where they got it from. But it was in 8 European countries. It was a randomized, controlled, multi-center trial. And what they did was they randomized people who had lost weight over a period of time of 12 weeks on a very low-calorie diet. And then after they lost the weight, they took the successful weight losers and randomize them to 5 different diets, including a controlled government-advised diet and every combination of low protein at 15%, or what they called high protein at 30%, which is our recommendation, and low or high glycemic index. And what they found was the only group that did not regain their weight over a 6-month period was the high protein, low glycemic index group. So this showed that protein and good carbs work together at constant fat intake for weight maintenance. Very important insight that came from this 8-country study. Now, fats in foods, meats, dairies, poultry, and fish, butter, margarine, mayonnaise, they all have different fats, as do nuts, avocados, and coconut. There are hidden sources in sauces, gravies, creamy soups, baked goods, mixed dishes, and fried foods. But nearly all the fat you eat and store are what are called triglycerides, 3 fatty acids on a 3-carbon backbone. So the types of fats are either saturated, polyunsaturated, or monounsaturated fats, and they are often found together in the same food because there are 3 fatty acids. So we name the fats by the preponderance of what type of fatty acids they have. That sometimes leads to some confusion, but all fats, whether they're healthy or unhealthy, contain 9 calories per gram, and excess fat is stored as body fat. So when it comes to fat, you are what you eat, and I can take a sample of your body fat and tell what types of fat you've been eating over the last 2 years. It takes 2 years to turn over your fat. Last one in is first one out. Physical properties of fats are also important. Straight chain fatty acids are solid at room temperature, as in butter that you're familiar with. Unsaturated fats have kinks in them and tend to be softer or liquid at room temperature, like vegetable oils. Hydrogenated fats are made by chemically driving hydrogen into these polyunsaturated fats, making what are called trans fats. And these were originally used to replace lard in French fries. So in the 1950s, French fries actually contained lard. They just stick up in those little boxes and they would stand up at room temperature because the fat was solid. Then people found out it was lard that wasn't too appetizing to the consumers. So they said, okay, what can we do? And they chemically modified this to become a trans-saturated fat. Well, now trans fats are recognized as acting just like saturated fats. So on food labels, you'll see whether something contains a trans fat or does not. And these trans fats are now being eliminated by law from many, many different foods around the country. So here's a triglyceride chemical structure. And what you can see is a 3-carbon backbone, that is glycerol, which, 6 carbons would be glucose. This is half of a glucose molecule. And attached to those carbons are 3 fatty acids. And these 3 fatty acids could be of the different categories of unsaturated, saturated, monounsaturated, et cetera. And these are all the different types. Now, within the polyunsaturated group on this chart, you'll see there are omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids. They're named by the number of double bonds from one end of the molecule before you get to the first double bond, the number of carbons, rather, from one end of the molecule. So if it's 3 over, that's omega-3, 6 over is omega-6. These share enzymes and either become pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory mediators called eicosanoids. A separate category are monounsaturated. Those are called omega-9 fatty acids because the first double bond occurs 9 carbons from one end of the molecule. Saturated fats are a totally different group. Now let's look at omega-6 versus omega-3 polyunsaturated fats. As you can see, here are a bunch of enzymes that lengthen and desaturate these fats. So they go from 18 carbon to 20 or 22 carbon fatty acids that are either pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory because they're used to form eicosanoids such as prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and thromboxanes, which affect blood pressure, respiratory function, and blood clotting. So if we look at dietary fats and oils, we can see a wide range of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, as well as monounsaturated or saturated fats. And so when we name a dietary fat saturated or unsaturated, we're really covering up some of what's going on inside that fat. So if we look at coconut oil, for example, it's highly saturated, 87% saturated fatty acids, but it does contain 2% of a polyunsaturated. The other end of the spectrum, corn oil. In vegetable oils, 58% omega-6. It's a very rich source of omega-6. So when you lower your total fat intake, you're reducing omega-6 fatty acids in your diet when you're reducing some of these fats that contain a lot of this linoleic acid, an 18-carbon omega-6 fatty acid. Now, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratios have varied in human populations. The original Paleolithic or Stone Age diet, the omega-6, omega-3 ratio was about 0.8. And that's because there are fats in plant foods, and man evolved on plants, leaves, roots, stems, all kinds of stuff, very little amount of fat, and kind of a balance between omega-6 and omega-3. Now in Greece, prior to 1960, the so-called Mediterranean diet had a balance between 1.0 and 2.0 of omega-6 to omega-3. The current US diet, because we've taken corn oil and stripped out the omega-3s to give it more shelf life, our diet of vegetable oils, whether it's cottonseed or corn oil, safflower oils, these all have a high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. And so in Europe and the UK, it's 15. Now, if you look at Japan, they eat a very low-fat diet, rich in seafood, fruits and vegetables, soy protein, and their ratio is only about 4. Now, a doctor in Michigan developed what he called the highly unsaturated fatty acid ratios. And so instead of looking at all the fatty acids, including the 18 carbon, he restricts his analysis to those greater than 20 carbons. And the reason for that is that humans do convert to these levels, and the 18 carbon and 16 carbon are really irrelevant to what happens in the heart and in the blood vessels. And so when we look at a correlation of the proportion of omega-6 fatty acids greater than 20 carbons to omega-3, we find that the highest levels are in the US, and they have the highest risk of cardiovascular disease. As we go down to Japan and Greenland, we see much lower ratios, and of course they have a much lower amount. Now it's a proportion, not a ratio, and that is the proper way to look at it, because if you just use the ratio, you end up with a curvilinear relationship of risk. And this is something that Dr. Bill Lanz, who is a famous professor, was at the University of Michigan for more than 30 years. I invited him as a visiting professor to UCLA, and over the salad, this professor lectured me and said, David, it's not a ratio, it's a proportion. And you actually look at chemical equations, that's what they do. So you take the amount of omega-6 over the total omega-6 plus omega-3, that's how you get the proportion, and it's not a ratio. So fat intake recommendations, aim for about 20% of fat calories. Plant foods have an excellent ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, about 1:1. Diets high in vegetable fats have a very unbalanced ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, about 20:1. This is what you're going to find in your processed foods, your fried foods, all kinds of frozen foods. Keep added fats also to a minimum, especially when you're cooking. Spray on your fats. Try to use olive oil, which is a monounsaturated fats. The healthiest fats, omega-3 and omega-9, are found in fish, tree nuts, olive oil, and avocado, which is a great substitute for salad dressing. Now, we need fat. Body stores of fat in a lean 70-kilogram man are about 120,000, 130,000, 160,000 calories. And why do we need that? Because during starvation, the big guy on his Harley that gets lost in the desert is going to outlast the guy who's been running in the desert, because he has more body fat and he can survive for a much longer period of time by using the energy in that stored fat. And that's the real reason why obesity is so common. Fat was good for us until we got to this modern diet that's full of these snack foods and French fries and too much sugar. Fat was good for us when we were running around in jungles looking for enough food to live on, and we're on the verge of starvation. So fat Fatty foods were all preferred by ancient man. So what's this whole thing with keto diets and ketogenesis? Well, it turns out that ketones are very important metabolites in your body. When you're sleeping, you're not eating. And at that time, your body starts to produce ketone bodies from fatty acids. It starts using that fat energy right away. Now, fat's not soluble in water. We all know oil floats on water. So the liver converts the fatty acids into what are known as ketone bodies, which are water soluble and can be distributed to different organs in the body. You make acetone, acetoacetic acid, and beta hydroxybutyrate. These are all energy sources derived from fat. Now, during starvation, as we look over 40 days of starvation, look at that beta hydroxybutyrate. It goes up more than any other substance in your blood, more than the free fatty acids, and more than the acetoacetate, because acetoacetate and acetone are gases. You actually breathe them out and they come out of your breath. But the beta hydroxybutyrate goes around the body as an energy source. So here's the summary of what we've been talking about, what I call Nutrition 101. Let's go back to protein, the first nutrient, the most important one. The amount you need and the quality is very important for maintaining lean body mass. Fat, again, the amount and quality relative to your fat mass is very important. Carbohydrates, a limited amount is stored in the body, about 300 grams. You burn it off daily during exercise. Your microbiome is important in digesting it. And simple sugars are much different than refined carbohydrates. So refined carbohydrates get easily converted to fat and increased fat storage occurs. Your body normally carries 1 teaspoon of sugar or 5 grams in the bloodstream. When you have more than that in high sugar foods, that sugar goes to the liver and it is converted to fat unless you burn it off during exercise. If you're having a sports drink and you're on the treadmill, no problem. Sitting in front of the TV and you're running the remote, that sugar is going to be converted to fat. So personalizing nutrition that we've talked about today, we don't have all the answers yet. But personalized nutrition today starts with a lifestyle questionnaire, body composition for protein recommendation, blood testing for biomarkers like cholesterol and insulin and glucose, microbiome and genetic testing, more limited, but they are getting available. Food intake based on electronic diaries and evolving technologies. We learn more about what is in our foods. Believe it or not, a lot of the databases have inaccurate information. Physical activity, heart rate, and your movement using a global positioning or GPS can be used to measure movement, pulse, and blood pressure with wearable devices like the smartwatch that I'm wearing. That's an area that's going to evolve. Feedback on responses can be provided to individuals so diet and exercise behaviors can be optimized through personalized nutrition. And then personal and online coaching can be combined since nothing can approach the personal relationship developed with a coach. And personalization evolves as you transform your body, changing how your genes are activated and how your body is shaped, which is something we can now follow with 3D body shaping. So what are the take-home messages today? Number 1, classifying foods as carbs, proteins, or fats is misleading since few foods are composed of one macronutrient and the quality of the food can vary significantly. So there are healthy carbs, unhealthy carbs, healthy proteins, unhealthy proteins, healthy fats, unhealthy fats. Carbohydrates have gotten a particularly bad reputation due in part to the recent popularity of so-called high-protein, low-carbohydrate diets for weight loss. Fat still counts. A high carbohydrate diet could be plant-based. A whole food diet with phytonutrient-rich fruits and vegetables as the base, with a moderate amount of whole grains and healthy low-fat proteins to balance nutritional needs. Use your healthy fats sparingly. They're 145 calories a tablespoon. Many of the popular high-protein diets also consider all proteins more or less equal, but high-quality proteins are distinguished by having essential and non-essential amino acids. So balance is the unifying principle of personalized nutrition and a healthy, active lifestyle. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this master class of the Herbalife Nutrition Institute on personalizing nutrition. This is a great way to understand all the aspects of nutrition, to cut through some of the false messages. And I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and I hope to see you again soon. This is Dr. Dave Heber.